Hi, I'm wondering if you guys wouldn't mind if before I get started, if I could just snap a quick selfie. Is that cool? I know, hashtag I'm a millennial, sorry. Okay, all right, ready? If everyone could look, right there. 1, 2, 3. One more, 1, 2. Cool, awesome, thanks for that. Hi, so I'm gonna start today sharing a little bit of my story that rewinds back to probably when I was most of your age. When I was 22, about a month after graduating from college, I bought a one-way ticket to New York City. And during this time, I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't really know anybody in New York City very well at the time. I didn't really have a plan. And my parents, who have always been very supportive of my ideas, were like, oh my goodness, Angela, can you at least have an interview lined up? Please don't do this. We're gonna worry about you. So we compromised and I said I would get an interview. So I spent a few weeks sending a cover letter to anyone that I could find in New York City that was looking for any kind of job. And I recently found this cover letter because Gmail doesn't delete anything. And I wish that I could burn it, but it has an electronic paper trail. And it basically pitches myself as I had no prior work experience to this, and I'm applying for jobs in Manhattan saying, I was a baton twirler at the university, so I'm not shy because I twirled in front of 80,000 people. Or I'm a barista at Starbucks, so I deal with really demanding people and I keep them happy, so I'm really good with people, you should trust me. Things like that, I mean, come on. I finally got one response after 3 weeks, and the editor-in-chief at a magazine emailed me back and said, you were the least qualified out of hundreds of applicants, but we're so intrigued by your cover letter, can you come in tomorrow at 4? And I said, this is on Thursday night at 7 p.m., and I say, yes, I'll be there tomorrow at 4. I fly up there, I end up landing the job, and spoiler alert, 9 years later, I've had an amazing experience. I live in Brooklyn with my amazing husband, Ty, and our 7-week-old son, Theodore. And this whole story is I'm proud of it. It sounds bold. But if I'm being really honest with you, it was completely rooted out of fear, and I was running from something. You see, prior to New York City, I lived in some communities in India with a gypsy community in Romania. This is really pixelated because it was taken on a disposable camera in 2006. Technology's come a long way. And I felt so alive there. I had never really left Tallahassee and gone abroad like that before. And the people I met there were so inspiring. Their stories are incredible. The circumstances they live in and they thrive in these marginalized communities taught me so much about the human race. I felt so alive. And then I came back home and I started to, I was sleeping and I had a feather bed and I had lattes and I had all these things that seemed very frilly, and I started to feel very depressed and very depleted. I started to feel a lot of feelings of feeling guilty or pity for the people, or why was I born here, and the people that I fell in love with in India or Romania were born there, and it's so unfair. And in all honesty, I felt really dark and depleted in all the ways. It's really obnoxious for a privileged Westerner to feel dark and depleted, you know what I mean? And I began to realize that something was so broken within me, I didn't really know how to function. So New York City was my last-ditch effort at trying to reawaken my heartbeat, so to speak. I think what really had happened is I had kind of reversed the narrative. I went abroad to try to get to know situations and help people, but what had really happened was I had kind of turned into this person suffering from a superhero complex, and I was trying to save these people, which sounds really disgusting, I admit, and in my line of work, that's a very vulnerable thing to admit, that I can sometimes suffer from superhero complex in the nonprofit sector, but it happened. So as fate would have it, though, in New York City, I had one of the greatest privileges of my life. I befriended a community that ultimately this group of friends was responsible for building out the robust model of what 100 Cameras is today. And 100 Cameras, what we seek to do is we work with kids living in marginalized communities all across the world. And we teach them that their perspective matters, and we teach them that the way they see their world is important. They can capture realities in those communities in ways that I, as a Western foreigner with a camera from the outside looking in, just simply cannot do. They can tell in such a true, untainted way that still shows that life is beautiful to them. They're documenting things in their world that shouldn't be that way. Kids are walking hours to get water that oftentimes is not clean water. They're going to schools in huts. They've actually suffered from what starvation feels like. We know life shouldn't be this way for them, but they're showing it in a way that has such hope and joy and has such dignity as a fellow human. And I fell in love with it. They laughed coming back from the schoolyard, just like I did in high school. And they run through fields, and I think that ball is made of like trash, kind of wrapped up with duct tape, but they're playing soccer. They laughed and they joked around. And what happened when I saw these images from the first project in South Sudan, I'll never forget it. I'm in a tiny Manhattan apartment looking at this idea that had just been put into action with our first project in South Sudan, and I responded in a way of, I want to get back to that. I want to get back to there is so much hope in these communities, and there's so much that our human race is capable of. I want to get back to the glass is half full. I want to become alive again. That was the first thing that happened. And the second thing that happened when I was looking at these images is, what can we do to empower these kids to realize that this perspective is possible to keep as they grow up into an adult? What can we do to help keep their joy alive? And my favorite part about our model is that we then sell the kids' images, and that money goes back to their communities to fund their own lifeline supplies, their own medical supplies, their own educational supplies, because we want to be a part of teaching them the full circle of they can be the change makers in their community. We want to reverse the concept of Western aid and how they experience it. So we've done that. We've done projects all over the world. We've built a robust curriculum. We've been pretty reputable. But I have to stand before you today and say these kids have taught me way more than I could ever possibly teach them. And it's broken down into 3 things they've taught me about perspective. And I think this is so applicable in our situation as a generation, because that selfie I took when I first walked out here, why did I do that? Just because I want to document later on my channels that I matter, look at me, so cool, and I'm in a blazer, and look at all these people at a TEDx talk, and I'm just trying to establish myself, right? And this isn't an attack on selfies. I take selfies, you take selfies, we all take selfies, we love selfies. But it is a metaphor at something that's a part of our culture. We're all trying to establish a narrative. We're all trying to establish and make a difference and create a mark, and this is a good thing. But if it's not taken care of and it's not fostered well, it can easily become like my superhero complex, where I twist the narrative to be about me. And I twist it to be so dark that I end up being dark and depressed and depleted and paralyzed and not actually able to make the difference that I set out to do. But these kids, they've taught me so much more about how not to do that. To start off with, they've taught me that we control the perspective. Sounds very simple, but it's actually really hard to live out. Our kids have survived some of the gravest circumstances you could ever imagine. Survived civil wars that have taken their whole family and left them as orphans. Actually have survived starvation and not knowing when the next meal is going to come from. They've been street trafficked. They've lived under bridges. They've experienced horrific crimes. They've seen some of the worst diseases, lost people to diseases that we've had vaccines for decades, since before I was born. They've lived some tough stuff. We have one student, his name is Jean-Marie. He's pretty awesome. He is a part of our project that we did in Baltimore, Maryland with a refugee youth population. And Jean-Marie, I'll never forget this kid. He's telling me his story, and he, as a refugee from New Guinea, he and his family were of great political stature, very respected in the community, very wealthy. But as the political climate started to change, it became very unsafe for his family to be there. So unsafe, he actually remembers running through the bush in Africa, being chased by men with machine guns as a child. And all of these stories, so they basically pack up and leave overnight. He doesn't get to say goodbye to his friends, his schoolmates, a lot of his family members. They bounce around a few countries, finally landing in Baltimore, Maryland, thinking that he's arrived into the promised land, right? But he doesn't realize that then it's going to be a whole process of assimilating. He enrolls in school, and the teachers are teaching in English. He doesn't understand fluent English, so he teaches himself fluent English, later gets grades so high he makes the honor roll, mind you, deals with bullying, deals with being misunderstood, deals with his family coming from one of being respected to his mother and father getting odd jobs around town wherever they can. But what he tells me is in his photography, he's really attracted to the idea of contrast, because the darkness in his photos, he says, the darkness represents the bad things that have happened in his life, the hard things, the things that he wishes never happened and that he could forget. But the light in his photography represents the good things, the things that he wants to remember. And he said, I always want to live in the light. I always want to focus on the light. And what he teaches me so profoundly in these words is that it's actually not our circumstances that have the power to control us or to affect us. Our circumstances really have no actual power to define anything about us or to shape us. It's how we choose to respond, it's how we choose to act, and it's how we choose to interpret what happens to us that is what shapes us. It's the only thing that has power to define who we are. And these kids have taught me that if we choose to, the way that we respond to the hard things in life or the good things in life can help us live in a way that we can choose hope, light, joy, and gratefulness. Secondly, our students have taught me that choosing the positive perspective is not always easy. We all know this is true. It's not. And I think what they've taught me is that the sooner that we can actually acknowledge that, yes, life is hard sometimes. We've all gotten older. By this time in our lives, we've experienced probably a lot of disappointment, a lot of hurt, maybe betrayal. We've maybe experienced a lot of loss, some sort of suffering. I think we all could agree that we have seen happen in our lives. This is the reality. The sooner that we can just stop trying to deny that that's the reality and accept it, the sooner we can actually start to lean into what we can do about it. For example, we did a project in Cuba, and we know the situation in Cuba, resources can be somewhat limited. It's a complicated situation. One of our students, as we're walking through town during one of the classes, is having a conversation with another one of our co-founders in Spanish. And the conversation basically goes like this. She says, hey, what happens when one of these cars break? Okay, we all know that cars look old. They look like they're straight out of the 1950s I Love Lucy show. So they're probably a little hard to keep running. So she says, what happens when one of your cars breaks? And he says, we fix it. Cool, well, what happens when it breaks again? And he says, we fix it. Okay, well, what happens when it breaks again and you don't know if you can fix it? We fix it. Okay, well, what happens if it breaks and you don't have a part to fix it with? He says, we figure out how to build a new part to fix it. And in that, I realized in such a simple metaphor, our students are so wise beyond their years that they're not trying to change the fact that something's broken. They're not trying to deny that something is broken. We live in a world of wars, of pain, of hate crimes. What is that even about? Life is not as it should be. We can all agree on that. It can be broken. But what he does is he instead tries to focus on what he can do about it. And what I've learned in that is that we have to just mourn the pain. We can't silence it. Being positive doesn't mean that we just stay up here happy all the time. It means we actually look the lions in the eye that have made us realize that life isn't always easy. Life isn't always what I want it to be. And the sooner we can acknowledge that, the sooner we can actually do something to fix it. Finally, students have taught me that a life filled with positivity is built on the little instances. It's the little things. It's all the little instances that have happened in you and my life, I think that was grammatically correct, in our lives up till now, that shape who we are, right? So then, it's all of the little things that happen today, tomorrow, next week, next year, that are going to add up and shape our future self. And this is the self that we have the power to create right now. The past is the past. We can mourn what hurt us, we can celebrate what was beautiful, but who we are today is because of all the lessons we learned from that, but what we have the control to create is what happens in the future version of ourselves. We do this exercise in the field. It's literally my favorite day of our whole course. And what we do in it is something called the mind map exercise. And this is a simple process where we ask our students to chart their life, rating every year up until their current year, rating every year as either a high or a low. Then we ask them to go through and process and write down why did they label it a high and why did they label it a low. And it's fascinating in all of our projects in so many different cultural backgrounds in India, Cuba, South Sudan, New York City, Baltimore, etc. In all of our projects, it's fascinating. The kids rate what is high in their life as something that I would think was really low. You know, they experienced some kind of loss. They lost both of their parents. But because it brought them to the children's home where they now have a family that loves them, they rate it as a high out of gratefulness. or they survived a civil war, or they finally found food that year and they had a food supply. Things like that that actually point them to a high because of their perspective they took from it. Because of the posture of how they chose to respond, what happened in their life, they were able to look back and rate that year as a high. That's mind-blowing to me. And it's something that is also so very life-changing, that how we choose to interpret what happens to us and the perspective we choose is ultimately what defines us. You know, the strength of our students, yes, they've taught me we can control our perspectives. Yes, they've taught me that it's not going to always be easy to do so, to choose the positive perspective. They've taught me that it's the little things that add up. That's what creates the bigger picture, no pun intended. But they've also taught me, their strength has taught me that it is my responsibility to choose this. It is on me to choose this perspective. Choosing hope, gratefulness, joy is free, and it is available to every human in the human race. But it is up to me to choose that posture. And so I ask you, as I ask myself, what would it do if we shifted our narrative? What could we do as a collective unit in this room? What impact could we make if we all chose this power of perspective to choose positivity, to choose hope, to choose gratefulness, to choose grace, to choose joy? What could we do? As Margaret Mead has so famously said, never doubt what a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can do to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And so I ask you to consider what the kids of 100 Cameras have taught me. I ask you to invite that in, and we can consider what change we could create together, because it has to and it should start with us. Thank you.